Okay, time for a classic character profile now. And this is in memory of Irene Sutcliffe, who sadly passed away a couple of months ago now, wasn't it? Or beginning of May, we found out that the actress had died, and she played Maggie Clegg on Coronation Street, which admittedly for me was a character that I didn't really know very much about. So
Let's learn together.
I've already learned, and I'm going to impart my learning, and you can just pretend that you know and read along the
I
notes.
know everything there is to know about
if you
Maggie
knew
Clegg
this.
that's written in this notepad.
So Maggie Clegg then, she was born on the 12th of June 1924. Her parents were Harold and Margaret Preston. Her sister is Betty, as in Betty.
As in Betty Hot Pot Betty.
Hot Pot Betty.
Hottie Pot Pot.
Was Maggie's sister, Betty Williams, by the time she died. Maggie got married twice, once to Les Clegg. My big dilemma when I was deciding, when we were doing this, when I was writing the notes of this character profile is, do we say we're doing a profile on Maggie Clegg, or do we do a profile on Maggie Cook? Because she married Ron Cook in 1974, and literally just after that she left the programme, so she is technically Maggie Cook now, but while she was in the show, Maggie Clegg. So I'll go with Maggie Clegg. She didn't have any children of her own, although for the duration of the time that she was in the show, we were led to believe that she did have a son.
She did have
Gordon
children of her
Clegg.
own. They weren't it wasn't her biological child.
It was not her biological child. It was actually Betty's that she pretended was her own, but she didn't pop it out.
It was her own.
It was controversial. Maggie first appeared on
Gordon
Coronation.
Clegg, he was 1950.
Yes, he was born in 1950. Maggie first appeared on the 1st of April 1968 and made her final appearance on the 13th of January 1975, and that was after 414 episodes. So, back in 1967, it's hard to believe this now, Gemma, Coronation Street was going through a bad patch.
No.
It happens.
No, it doesn't.
True. Granada was actually thinking about cancelling it back then, and I don't think ITV is thinking about cancelling Coronation Street at the moment, just because a few more people are moaning about it than there had been. But
Can you imagine how different our lives would be if they cancelled Coronation Street?
I know, what would
we spend all
we'd
our
probably
time
be
doing?
like at a nightclub every Friday
know.
night. Yeah. Is that where all the youths go?
To the discotheque.
To the nightclub.
The nice club.
Graffiti Club. So they brought in Stan Barstow, a story consultant, to try and see if he could think of any ways to get out of this massive slump. And one of the ideas that he came up with was the Clegg family, and because he wanted, and this was
worked.
Before, this is ahead of his time. He wanted to have more issues-based storylines in Coronation Street.
What an visionary!
That's the kind of thing that I kind of would very much link with the last 20 years in Coronation Street, is having issues-based things. But he wanted to have a family where alcoholism was a big factor in the...
Better drink my whiskey, ain't I, before the end of this?
Yeah, Gemma's got whiskey today. She's stolen her dad's whiskey.
This is very expensive whiskey. I didn't steal it. We bought it for Burns night.
Fine. Irene was 37 when she was hired on Coronation Street, but Maggie, the character she played, was 43. And Irene had previously done a load of TV and theatre work as well. And I've got a quote from her. She said, when she was ready to start on Corrie, she says, "I remember my heart thumping, waiting for my first entrance outside the shop, and Pat Phoenix was saying, 'Oh, you'll be all right, Chuck.'" And all right she was. So, there's a lot of history written for her, or written about her. I think most of it it's probably from Darren Little again, but there might have been stuff that was mentioned on the programme. So she and Betty were born and raised, yes, on Tile Street. And the parents were very devout Christians, especially the dad. He was prudish, Christian, sort of to the extreme.
I always wonder how these prudish Christians end up with so many kids.
Well, 2.
Lie back and
doing the Lord's work.
Only did it twice.
Lie back and think of the North. He was a tram inspector, Harold was, and he used to read the girls a Bible verse every night. I can't imagine that when I think of Betty. I can
imagine her sitting there rolling her eyes.
Yeah, I guess. And he was such a prude that he even refused to let Margaret hang the girls' underwear on the washing line outside to dry. What
about her underwear? He's like, it's fine for you.
Maggie went on to work at the food office during the Second World War, and during the war was when she met and dated Mike Ritchie, who was an American Air Force sergeant. Things didn't go very far with them. He comes back into the show later on. He was definitely invented for later storylines. But then Les Clegg, who was a sailor that she met during the war.
An American or an English?
English. Okay. He was proper northern stock.
Okay.
He was. They met and during the war and then married in 1947. Now,
it's just. Do you ever think about people during the war just getting on with their lives and like marrying and
keeping
having
calm
kids?
and carrying on?
I just can't imagine.
Tragedy. Harold was hit and killed. So this is a dad, remember?
Yeah, the prudish
by a tram
ticket
irony.
Inspector. It was like, you don't have a ticket.
There's someone on there without a ticket. I'm not going to let this tram pull out of the station until he pays. And the tram driver's like,
sorry, I got a schedule.
Yeah, splat. But this is when Maggie and Les were on honeymoon. So I guess they came back.
That, didn't they? Well, that's what happened to old Queenie, she was on her honeymoon, I think, wasn't she? Or she was on holiday when her dad died.
She was,
to get off the plane, and everyone was like, God save the Queen. And she was like, cool, blimey.
So Maggie and Les tried to have children, but they failed to conceive. I think she had a few children, a few pregnancies that miscarried. She had a few children, but she didn't like them.
Like,
she tried
rubbish.
Let's try again. Oh, I can't. No, she could not carry any children. But Betty, older sister Betty, was having an affair with Ted Farrell, who'd been a corporal during the war, and she fell pregnant.
Is it?
Not really, having an
Corporal?
affair. Oh,
No,
corporal. Affairs, good or bad, discuss.
We should do that as a middle section.
So
Corporal, is it good? Do you know anything about that?
no, I've got no idea.
What, is a lance corporal better than a corporal, or is it like vice captain and captain?
I don't know. I don't even know about English army ranks.
I've got a few things.
No, I know a little bit from Blackadder Goes Forth, but there won't be corporals in that anyway.
What I want to do in my life, by the time I'm dead, I want to be able to know every dog breed, every flower and tree.
You want to know the birds, don't you?
All the birds, even by their song, and
Ranks
understand
in the army.
ranks in the army and police force. Because I think they're unknowable for me at the moment.
Betty had had this affair. She's been having it off with Corporal Ted Farrell. He went back to his wife in Portsmouth, though.
What?
And then Betty says, "Look, I'm
not
up the
going
duff
there."
here, sister. I don't really want this kid. Maybe you should take it. The future child." So the Cleggs agreed. They adopted the son secretly, pretending that he was their own. So they moved to Birmingham for a bit.
Stop saying their own, because it makes it sound like adopted children don't belong to
You know what I mean.
I know, but think about the language that you use and the connotations that you don't intend.
Okay. So they went off to Birmingham.
Pretending he was their biological son.
Yes. They went off to Birmingham, just like Fizz is off to Birmingham so that Jenny McAlpine can have a baby.
Birmingham.
Well, these guys went on to Birmingham so Maggie could have a baby.
Birmingham hides all sins.
This was in Birmingham. Was where Les really, hit the bottle and became an alcoholic, and he was a nasty piece of work. He was violent. He was abusive towards her. He beat her up. By 1968, they were back in Weatherfield again. Too rough even for the Brummies. And they're like,
Get out. Oh
no, I was going to try and drive.
Get out.
Get back to where you... No, that's Scout.
All.
No, that's Scout.
Oh.
Anyway, I should know. I should be able to do this. I'm just from the Midlands myself.
You're literally down the road from these people.
Never mind. I've done my Vicky accent already today, and that was perfect.
Do it in what accent do you think you could do right now?
None.
Oh, and none? Get out!
They went back to Weatherfield, and they were living on Tackler's Lane, and eventually Maggie got completely fed up with all the neighbours gossiping about her husband, because Maggie used to have to just sit there at home waiting for her husband to come back from the pub or the offie or whatever. So they decided to move house, and this is kind of where the Coronation Street story starts. So in 1968, David and Irma Barlow.
Yeah.
David, Ken's brother, Irma, Hilda's daughter.
Irma Barlow.
What was that?
That's like her saying, I'm a Barlow.
Oh.
Irma Barlow.
They decided to go and move to Australia, newlyweds I think they were, and Irma was upped duff. So they put the corner shop for sale. Irma was
You
in charge of the
can't
corner shop.
you can't be called Irma and have a noun as your surname, can you?
What else are you going to have as a surname?
Well, Barlow's not really a noun, is it? Like
It's a proper
yeah,
noun.
But, yeah, all right, not a proper noun. Like Irma Duck. This whiskey's working really good.
I know, you're loving it, aren't you? So Maggie and Les put in an offer, and that was accepted.
Irma Duck.
So, gosh, we're only halfway through the podcast here, Gemma. Don't drink any more of that, please.
Okay.
So the Cleggs moved into the flat above the shop. So this is where Daniel's living now, and Adam.
Right.
This is where the Cleggs lived back in 1968. Les tries to go sober. He was in, 40 episodes of Coronation Street or so? And a lot of the time, the story kind of was that he presented as a nice, loving, fatherly, good husband and everything. But
Perfect
he had this
gentleman.
secret alcohol problem that none of the neighbours knew about. So he and Maggie didn't even go to the Rovers during the first few months.
But they think that's weird, don't they?
Yeah, well, the neighbours think, why on earth wouldn't you go to the pub?
What else is there to do?
There isn't even a bistro to go to
They haven't
around
even
here.
invented television.
What do they do of an evening? So when Maggie is asked about, where have you come from, why have you moved, she's just completely vague and tries to change the subject about it. So Les, as I say, he was a bit of a gentle giant when he was sober. Everybody loved him. All his customers thought he was great, but it doesn't last long. He with being in charge of the shop, he tries to, go on the wagon for a little bit. Is that the right word, or is it go off the wagon? On the wagon is sober.
You fall off the wagon.
He's sober. He's right on that wagon. He is strapped into that wagon for the first couple of months that they're living in Coronation Street. But it doesn't last long though, because he eventually comes back home drunk. He smashes the shop window. Stan Ogden gets blamed for that one. Then another time he goes out to a bowls match, which he wins, ends up knocking himself out on the way back.
He gets drunk.
He gets drunk, yeah. He ends up knocking himself out by Maggie tried to take the bottle off of him. Maggie and Gordon were trying to wrestle this bottle, this flask, whatever is off of him, and pushes him, and he bashes his head. So
into
basically,
the shop display.
Into the shop display.
He's got a thing about shops.
But that's because he owns one.
Yeah, I know, but he keeps falling over into him.
He almost manages to get home. Goes all the way from the pub, all the way from the bowling green, and then just at the final hurdle, he falls over.
Into a shop display.
He realises that he kind of needs to see some professional help at this point. Goes to a psychiatrist for his problem, and he spends 2 months in hospital getting sorted out before going back to Birmingham to go and live with his brother there. Maggie stays at the shop though and kind of waits to see where the land lies. What's Les going to do next?
He should have just waited a few years, because this is just normal British behaviour now.
Yeah.
Going through a shop window and knocking down displays.
He was also ahead of his time.
Yeah. You go into a psychiatrist now, they'd be like, how often do you got drunk twice?
Get out.
Get out.
Maggie.
That's like the weekend for most people.
Maggie's staying on in Coronation Street, and she hires Ina Sharples to help out in the shop because when Les was going off the rails a bit, Ina was very supportive of her, so Maggie hires her to thank her really. But then Ina goes off on holiday, and when she comes back she finds that Valerie Barlow has replaced her in the shop, and this has got me wondering, did Ina then tamper with that hairdryer just to try and bump off Valerie Barlow so she can get her position in the shop back? I don't know. Maggie tries to keep son in inverted commas Gordon, away from Lucille Hewitt, who was the teen tearaway girl of 1960s Corrie. He's a bit sweet on her, and Maggie thinks that Gordon can do better than her, and then this of course gains her an enemy in the form of Annie Walker, who was Lucille's guardian. Maggie eventually backs off of this when she realises that she's making matters worse. And I can't remember, I haven't written the note down here, I think that Lucille and Gordon went off to Gretna Green. They were going to get married or something, but did they get married? I don't think they got married, but Maggie was cool with it by then. Do you want to do 1969, Gemma?
Named after the crab.
Named after the pair of boobs.
Gordon leaves to go and live in London to work in an accountancy firm, because they don't really do maths up north, apparently. Betty and her husband, Cyril, move into the shop flat with Maggie, and then Betty decides that she's going to work in the shop, which Maggie doesn't like the idea of, so she gets her a job working at the Rovers.
Yeah, so this is Betty's first appearance. It's interesting that, I mean, Betty is by far, the character that lasts longer on Curry. We've still got the photo of Betty and the Rovers, and she was just brought in because less than a year after the Clegg family moved into the show, the only one left was Maggie. It's like, get the rest of the family and let's invent a sister for her. And
the only reason she ended up as a beloved barmaid is that Maggie didn't want to work in the shop.
Yeah, because Betty was the much more bolshier, more forthright sister, and she's like, I'm going to come in and live with you. I'm going to work in the shop.
Yeah, no thanks.
Yeah.
Maggie became friendly with Len Fairclough, and Betty was trying to play Cupid because she thinks that Maggie is lonely. But she won't date him officially because she is still technically married to Les. And then the neighbours start to gossip about them. And
he takes her to the Rovers, Len does. I think, was this her first trip to the
She'd never been before.
I think that was right.
Oh, right, okay.
But she got Betty a job in the Rovers. So maybe she had been in there. She called through the letterbox. Annie, give her sister a job, please.
Well, maybe
we fell out last
maybe when
year.
Annie came to the shop, she asked her then.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Oh, I got a fun fact about this.
Go on then.
This about what was going on in the shop this time. So 1969 was the year that Coronation Street switched into colour, and great and everything, but all the tins of beans and spam
Vegetables
or whatever they
stuff.
had, tinned carrots and peas and everything back then. The cameras couldn't cope with all the bright shades of them, so they had to paint the tins with like a grey wash to take to dull them down a little bit. Otherwise, when the cameras tried to film them, they just couldn't balance the colours and they would flare and everything. Second fact about the shop in the 1960s, we have Kenner's for the chocolate now on Coronation Street. Back then, the brand name Key was used, so K-E-Y was used, and all the products in the corner shop were Key branded.
Nice.
Two interesting facts. Because they didn't want to be seen to be endorsing anything, but in classic Coronation Street at the moment, which is 1992, there's brands all over the place, isn't there? I know you're not watching it, but when you come in and you see corner shop scenes, you got your Quavers, you got your Kellogg's, all over the place, all the chocolate brands and proper brands.
More real to me.
It really, really makes it feel more real.
But we've changed the laws about advertising in this country several times. So.
Yeah, so if you're not Co-op or Costa, then you can.
Well, they do. They have some in the background, don't they? But for close-up shots, they're not allowed to use.
No, it seems like it was a lot more obvious in the 1990s, so I guess this fact is suggesting that in the late 60s you also had to be careful with the brands that you showed.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1970, Maggie goes off for a little bit to visit Les in Birmingham, and they agree that it's not going to work out. They've been separated for a year or so now. They're going to divorce, which means that she can date Len. She does for a bit, but he's more interested in Anita Reynolds, who's the barmaid in The Flying Horse, who is 20 years younger than him.
Oh, good gravy.
I know. Interesting fact number 3. Anita Reynolds was played by Liz Sladen, who went on to play Sarah Jane Smith in Doctor Who.
You liked her, didn't you?
I did like Sarah Jane Smith, and I didn't watch any of the old Doctor Who's, but when they brought the character back for a couple of episodes in the new, the revival of Doctor Who, and then they gave her own spin-off show and everything. I thought
funny robot dog.
Yes, with K9. Funny robot dog.
I don't know.
I could see why.
But you watched the
Sarah
show,
Jane.
didn't you?
Yeah, I watched
Sarah Jane Adventures.
Yeah, I know it's for kids. So it's gone before her time, Liz Sladen. I don't know whether I realised that she was in Coronation Street, but yeah, she caught the eye of Len Fairclough.
Wow,
so Maggie dumped him. Then 1970 is when we find out that David Barlow, remember him? He's gone off to Australia with Irma and baby. I've written David Barlow and baby David, so one of these is wrong. What was the baby called? I've written it up here.
It's David Jr.
No, it's not. It is. No, I haven't got the name of the baby. What's the name of the baby called? I've got no idea.
Benjamin.
That's going to bug me now.
Philip.
Anyway, the baby and
Reginald.
David die. Oh, man.
Baby.
That's going to really bug me. That's really, really bugging me. Find out.
Why
for me.
don't
What
you
was
find
Ken's
it out?
brother?
You look it up.
Okay.
Because I can't begin to understand what you're talking about.
You're too drunk to work up an iPad at the
what you're
moment.
talking about. So David Barlow and the baby of who knows what it's called die in a car crash in Australia, and then Irma She gets bought a share of the shop by Stan for £600, and by the end of the year, she and Maggie are equal business partners.
Darren Barlow.
Oh, Darren.
Darren Barlow is the baby. See, this is still what I think. This is what I want to happen in for the 60th anniversary. I want them to bring Irma Barlow back.
Duck.
Because the link that she would have to Ken as the sister-in-law, and she'd be able to bring back news probably on Hilda's death and everything. I really, really, really want Irma to come back.
I'm sure they've got some plans.
Not for that.
Please have her come back with a married name that is some hilarious noun.
Irma Gerd. Where are you up to?
There.
So Maggie goes back to Birmingham towards the end of 1970. It's reported, she finds out that Les is seriously ill in hospital. She stays there a bit until he's better, but that's kind of one of the last things we hear about it, really. We know that by 1974, Les is dead, but I don't think it's actually reported at the time in the show. Maggie.
Until he's better, but he dies 4 years later.
You can get better and then die again at a later date.
Die again.
It's alcoholism, or he dies of alcoholism, I think.
Complications related to, Michael. You can't die of being alcoholic.
Yes, sorry, of course. She goes out with it. She's got quite an eye for the Americans, doesn't she?
She likes
she goes
a man
out
in
with
uniform.
American soldier Greg Flint.
Greg Flint.
I like the sound of him. Greg. 1971. Gordon's back in Korea again at this point. I think, was he in at that point? I don't know. If he wasn't, his fiancée at least was. Jennifer Swan.
What a
Gordon
fabulous
gets
name.
engaged to in 1971.
He's
his secretary at his London accountancy firm.
And I bet you she wears high heels.
She rubs Maggie right up the wrong way by some of the things that she says about Maggie's life, because even though I think Jennifer grew up as a bit of a working class girl herself, she's climbed the social ladder. Yes. So now she describes Maggie's working class life in Weatherfield as being terrible, and Maggie doesn't like this at all. Ray Langton knows Jennifer from somewhere, I can't remember where this was, and he tells Maggie that Jennifer's just a gold digger, and rather than warning her son off of this gold digger, Maggie decides that she's an ambitious lass. I think my Gordon could learn a bit from her. And so she bites her tongue about it. But in the end, he splits from her anyway, so...
Well.
Oh, well.
She's a social climber. She'll bugger off soon, won't she?
Alf,
if he's from such poor stock.
Alf Roberts is the next man to come along in Maggie's life. And I didn't really know much about Alf's early life. But they were actually thinking of setting Alf and Maggie up at one point. But then when... the actress decided she wanted to leave Coronation Street, they obviously had to change that route completely for him. At this point, Alf was married, not to Audrey, of course, not to Renee, but to Phyllis, I think that she was called. And she was Alf's dead brother's wife. And Alf married Phyllis out of a sense of duty to his brother, which seems like a very chivalrous, old-fashioned thing to do. Alf's brother was married to Phyllis. Alf's brother dies.
Yeah.
Alf marries Phyllis.
I've heard of people doing this, and it just seems very odd.
And it was a completely loveless marriage.
I could not...
But they were married for like 20, 30 years odd.
I hate to say this, Michael, but if you die, I'm not marrying Jane.
So she starts to kind of... She gets friendly with Alf Roberts, but because he's married to this person he doesn't even love, they don't get too close.
Sad.
But he returns to her life later. Irma, meanwhile, is becoming less and less reliable in the shop, and one day she does a midnight flit, and that was when the actress left. What?
All the way through this, whenever we talk about old classic horror, I always think, if I had a dog, what would I call it? Right, Reenie's a good one. Lucille's also brilliant, but Irma...
Irma Doug. Irma Doug. Gemma.
I really want a dog just to call it Irma Dog. Right, 1972. Both the Turpins and the Walkers want to buy Irma's share of the shop, but that doesn't sound very appealing to Maggie. So she decides to take out a bank loan to buy it herself, and she asks Norma Ford to be her new assistant. Then Norma decides to put an ad in the personal column in the Gazette to find Maggie a fella. And then she gets a response from Ron Cook, And that goes well until she finds out that he is a recovering alcoholic. So she turns him down and he leaves Weatherfield.
She's like, done this before, mate.
I'm going through this again.
No.
Alf's
But
wife...
don't forget, she later marries this Ron Cook. We said that earlier.
Just remember. Alf's wife, Phyllis, dies from cancer
Hooray,
in September.
he's free!
What a bummer. Alf isn't brave enough to suggest that he and Maggie take their friendship to the next level, though.
So shy. 1973, Maggie gets a telegram. Telegram? When did they stop telegrams?
Can you still send a telegram?
I mean, if you're the Queen and it's somebody's 100th birthday, maybe, but does she even do that anymore? I don't know, honestly, whether... We need to find this out. This could be a new untapped market of social media, and we could put our telegram address at the end of the podcast every week.
Okay,
you want to telegram us? Right. So she gets this telegram saying that Loverboy is coming, and she's like, "Who on earth is Loverboy?
Stop.
I've had so many men." It turns out that it's this Mike Ritchie that we said about earlier. He's quitting the Air Force. He's going back to America, and he wants to say goodbye to a load of his friends over here in England first. So Maggie's thrilled to see him again when he turns up on the street, but Alf is very rude to him. He kind of makes fun of the fact that he's American and does all his best anti-American jokes.
There's so many.
And so Mike goes off back to the States alone, and Maggie blames Alf for this because I think Maggie was, hoping that he would whisk her back off to America with her. I mean, he does actually have another woman waiting there for him.
You can still send a telegram.
Can you really? Oh, we need to get in there.
Oh, no.
Maggie decides as well in 1973 to extend the shop's floor space by knocking into the storeroom, and she wants to make it self-service, Gemma.
What?
Self-service corner shop in 1973.
Yeah, but I think that means something different, doesn't it?
Well, self-service shop is just what it is at the moment, isn't it?
That's
Take
what
your
I mean,
bits off the shelf rather than asking for the
Yes, I know.
poor
But
schmuck behind the counter to get it for you.
Some people might be listening and think she means like a computer. Self-service checkouts now mean go to the scan it yourself.
Yeah, but
back
this is
in the old days,
1973.
in England, I don't know in other countries, but in Britain, in the United Kingdom, I say broadening it every time, they used to have corner shops where all the merchandise was behind the counter, and whatever you wanted, you had to ask the person who worked there to get it off the shelf for you.
Well, it doesn't end up going...
Not everybody knows that.
No, you're right. It doesn't end up going through in the end anyway. I don't know when the switch to self-service actually happens, but Len Fairclough, who's working for the council at the time, he puts Maggie off the idea because it turns out that the council, Weatherfield Council, is planning to redevelop Coronation Street. So they're going to knock Coronation Street down, so you'd just be wasting your money if you did all this conversion work at the shop now,
hell.
Maggie. What?
Telegrams cost £23 plus 71 pence per word.
Really?
And delivery is next day. It's not even like you can send it and it turns up straight away.
Well, if we get a telegram, we'll know who our best fans are. Stop reading that now.
That's amazing. Apparently, telegrams to hotels and hospitals can also be delivered at the weekend. I bloody well hope so, for that much.
End of 1973, Norma Ford leaves the shop to go and look after her dad, and her dad was called Jacko, which is an awesome name. 1974, Gemma, go.
If you type in to Google,
Yeah.
can you still S?
Yes.
One of the auto-completes is shoot pigeons.
And can you?
I don't know. I didn't look into it, to be fair.
Well done, because we're doing a podcast right now. 1974, this is
busy.
Maggie's final full year on Coronation Street, Gemma, so give it all you got.
She has to break the news to Betty that her husband Cyril has died, and then Betty moves in with her and helps her run the shop for a little bit. Then Alf finally plucks up the courage to propose to Maggie, and she says, "Oh, I'll think about it," which is always a comforting
Alf's
response.
been, sniffing around her for a few years now, and by the time she still hasn't really considered whether she would marry him.
I love the fact that in the old days that was perfectly fine response, and if she later decided that she would actually quite like to marry him, the guy wouldn't even be slightly offended. He's like, "Yes, you have to decide because we're not in love with each other." Before she can answer, Ron Cook returns to Weatherfield on business.
The alcoholic.
Yeah, he's been dry since their last meeting. He hasn't touched a drop of alcohol, I mean to say, and invites Maggie to marry him and move to Zaire with him, where he's about to start a new job. And she says, "Oh, that sounds fantastic." Alf is a bit jealous, tells Gordon that Ron was an alcoholic. Then Gordon confronts Ron about it, but he's won around when he sees how much he loves his mum.
Bless him.
Ron and Maggie marry in July, leave for Zaire, and Alf then spends the rest of the day drowning his sorrows in the Rovers, just to demonstrate that she's made the perfect choice. The Hopkins family take over the corner shop and plan to buy it eventually. Then Granny Hopkins discovers Gordon's birth certificate stuck at the back of a drawer in the flat, proving that he was Betty's biological son. When Maggie and Gordon visit the street at Christmas, Maggie decides to tell him the truth herself, as she's afraid that Granny Hopkins, who's a vindictive woman, will do it first. Gordon doesn't take the news well. He goes out and he gets drunk.
And that was it. About a couple of weeks later, I thought it was the 15th of January, I think I said, it was Maggie's final appearance. She goes to the shop in January, pleading with the Hopkins family to keep this secret about Gordon really being Betty's, keep the secret for Betty's sake. She's still going to be knocking around here for the next 30 odd years. So please don't let anybody know. And I can't remember when it does come out, but anyway, that's the last that we see of Maggie Clegg, Maggie Cook. In 1976, Renee Bradshaw buys the shop from Maggie, but that's through Gordon, and that's Renee who marries Alf in the end. So he likes a shop girl, does Alf. And 2003, Betty mentions that Maggie's a widow, so Ron Cook has popped his clogs, but she's still living in Zaire. Or was it the Democratic Republic of Congo at that point? I don't know.
Gosh, I don't know.
That's what it is now. That's who we're sending our charity money to at school, isn't it?
Oh,
Congo.
I'll send them a telegram. So am I remembering this wrong, or was there a bit in Corrie when I watched it when they discussed that somebody found this birth certificate or some secret about Betty having a secret son? Because I think I do remember them talking about it after she died, perhaps.
I don't know whether there was much about it after she died. There might have been, because Gordon, they did have the actor who played Gordon. There's been a couple of Gordons over the year. I think there was one actor who played Gordon, who was Bill Kenwright, and then they brought him back sporadically over the next couple of decades with another actor. But then I think when Betty Driver, after she died, and they had Betty Turpin Williams, whatever, killed off in the show, then they brought Bill Kenwright back, and there may have been some mention of it then. But what you might be remembering as well is the Corrie years, you know, that documentary that they had, the weekly thing. There were 2 series of it around when we started the podcast.
Yeah.
Because there was the beginning of series 2 of the Corrie years was an episode called Scandals, and this was one of the segments in it. This is like the final segment in that Scandals episode, and it was just they just talked about how this massive retcon of the characters was dropped in as Maggie was leaving, and none of the cast were happy about it. Irene herself said it was a silly story. Bill Kenwright, who said played Gordon, said they sent me the scripts and I read them and I cried. I was shocked, really, really shocked, but not nearly as shocked as Irene, because she was not only shocked, she was angry. One of the writers at the time, John Stevenson, had said that Irene felt that it just undermined all the work that she'd done that created a believable mother-son relationship over the years between Maggie and Gordon. And even Betty Driver got obscene mail about it. She said, I had one. The heading was, "You dirty cow." And it went on, "You've always been so goody-goody, and there you are. You've had a child long before you were married." So this
people were so horrible. They still are now.
They still
thing
are,
is,
aren't
people
they?
are still horrible now, but they think that they're morally correct, just like people back in the day. But it's about totally different things, like, you know, these Twitter pylons and cancel culture, and somebody makes one comment which is a stupid comment, and then, you know, they're treated like a pariah for the rest of their lives. I just think people haven't changed at all.
No, but I found this really interesting.
I think this is sad because like I said before earlier, there's nothing. It seems as though there's the stigma about adoption, and it's sad to think that people would be upset. I think,
but no, the main thing that people were upset about was, for all this time that Maggie was in the show, it was believed that Gordon was her son, and it was written as if it was her son.
Yeah,
and
but
then
why can't an adopted child have exactly the same relationship? That's my point. Why wouldn't you treat an adopted son the same way as you would treat any other child?
I suppose
Especially back in those days when people were so bloody up themselves.
I suppose if Betty gave...
I think this is the best way of doing it. Because really, the moral of this story is that it didn't matter to her that it wasn't her child. It wasn't her biological child. She adopted him, and then he was her son. It doesn't matter. I think that's a lovely sentiment. I think that they totally... Because there's stigma about it, and the reason why she adopted this son is because of Betty having a child, and it was very looked down on for her to have not had a child out of wedlock and stuff, you know?
Is this not very similar to what we've had with Tyrone recently, where throughout the whole of the time that Jackie was in Coronation Street, and I know that wasn't very much, we believed that she was Tyrone's mum, and now we've been told, no, actually it wasn't, it was this person called Cassie who we've never actually seen. And that left a bad taste in a lot of Coronation Street fans' mouths.
Between being upset about something being a retcon, which is understandable, and being upset about something and saying that the relationship would have been different if you had known that they were adopted. So I think it's unfair to say...
No, I see what you mean. I hadn't thought about it like that. You would have a different relationship
with an adopted son than you would do with your real son. And I mean, to be fair, there are certainly things that would crop up for an adopted child that wouldn't crop up for a biological child. But I think it's a refreshing acceptance, you know, to have them treated exactly the same.
I suppose if you were at the time...
Not make a big deal and sensationalise it.
I suppose if you were at the time might think, hang on a minute, if through all this time Betty knew that Gordon was her son, would she have not said anything or had any looks or anything? And all this time we're supposed to believe that Betty was she was living there in the corner shop flat, working down the road at the Rovers with her own son, which she's had to keep a secret for all this time.
I can understand people thinking that, but you know, a lot of rubbish gets said about relationships and a mother's instincts and things, and not all women are the same, are they?
No.
Betty certainly seems like the sort of person who could put something in a box and just put it away.
I suppose so.
I think that's what British people are good at. Putting emotions in a little box, put them on the shelf.
Like I said, they wanted Maggie to marry Alf eventually, but then Irene decided that she wanted to leave the show when she did. They were going to have Maggie and Alf's wedding an excuse to bring Gordon back to the show. He was going to dump Lucille, and then he was going to seduce Lucille, and then dump her. But they couldn't even do that anyway because Jennifer Moss, who played Lucille, had to leave the show abruptly because of a drink problem of her own. Okay. So that was all. Yeah, it didn't really go to plan at all, any of this story. And so that was the end of Maggie, and then Irene went on to appear in a few other shows, such as The 10%ers. She was in With Nail and I, a classic film from 1987. I've not seen it, of course. Have you seen With Nail and I?
I've seen clips only.
I've heard of it.
I think I might have seen it. I don't remember.
She went on and did loads of stuff. We mentioned this a few weeks ago in the news section when we reported her death. But her final TV appearance was playing the King's mother in The Royals in 2015, and of course we talked about her being on the committee, and then later the vice president of the Actors Benevolent Fund. So she did a lot of work for that.
Lance Corporal of the Actors Benevolent Fund.
From 1985 onwards, and then she became
vice president,
vice captain in 2000. So she passed away earlier this year, aged 94, in May. So there we go. That's the character of Maggie.
That's the story.
Story of Maggie. And
the scandals.
Story, scandals, and how Betty came into the show as well.
Always change to remain the same.
Exactly. Hope you learned something there, viewers.
Yeah.
Listeners.